Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to our weekly serious review of several books under one topic. Today's topic is going to be the human capital, or sometimes they call it human resources, depending on the school. There are two schools of HR, the Harvard School and the Stanford School. One of them looks at underlines the human, and the other one underlines resources. So two big schools and very important topic, human capital today. Out of the first 50 books that we have reviewed, we have chosen 8 of the HR focused books. Human Equation by Pfeffer, Fifth Discipline by Sengi, Psychology of Conflict and Management in Organizations, Career Development, Getting More, Stuart Diamond's famous book, Engagement Code, The Peak for Learning and Development, and Crucial Conversations for how do we moderate conflict within the organization and within people. So we have split the topic today. The 8 books, we are going to review them under 4 key dimensions. Definition of human capital, and how do we actually look into the value of human capital, strategic people planning, developing the capital, and then engaging the capital and ensuring that this is something that the organization uses. When we look at the human capital and the first point of why is it important, and here the best book that actually started giving that point was the Human Equation by Pfeffer. Pfeffer started his book with a very nice quote when he said that many organizations are looking for success in all the wrong places. When organizations are looking at technology, looking at investments in terms of infrastructure, which are all very important. However, the human element, according to Pfeffer, is the most important element in the success of any organization, which makes sense, by the way, since the majority of organizations suffer in terms of the execution. Many organizations would have this strategy very well articulated. Of course, not everyone, but many of them, and those who cannot do it themselves, they hire consultants who are able to design a strategy for them and develop a strategy, although it's not ideal. Because the majority of organizations who depend on consultants, they need to really get involved in terms of designing their own strategy. However, that's doable in case an organization can do it. Either they do it internally, so it's doable if you are able to do it internally, or also sometimes you get external help, and this is usual where many organizations hire consultants to give them some sort of a best practice of what is happening in terms of the development. Also, organizations, when it comes to, after they design their strategy, they start, planning for the resources. They start planning for what kind of systems, policies, and procedures. Depending, based on the strategy, immediately you start resource planning and you start financial planning as well, which is part of the resource planning. However, the biggest gap is always in the execution. When it comes to the strategy, many organizations have well-articulated strategy, well-dedicated resources according to what they want to achieve. However, the execution is always a gap. So the failure in execution is a key point. And this is what, Sam starts his comments on the chat. He's saying that the organizations usually suffer and fail in the execution. And the most important is sometimes you have not incompetent or not proper people in their teams, which is exactly true, because there will always be conflicts and gaps in terms of performance, gaps in terms of values, gaps in terms of understanding and communication and tools as well. And this is what Pfeffer highlights in his book, which is what is known in the science of engagement and performance as discretionary effort. And discretionary effort is best defined when there is a gap between the have to do and want to do. And we all know that, in many organizations, we see them every day. We see people who are working, according to their job description. So what they do, they said, this is my work, this is not my work. It's my responsibility, it's not my responsibility. So people just follow the job description. They do a 9 to 5 job, which is, depending on the working hours, but 9 to 5, 9 to 2. So I just do my work. I do my job description. This is what I have to do. It's my minimum requirements, and this is what, is required from me. While there is a very big gap between when people want to do something, this is, as much as have to do is driven by a job description, want to do is driven by values and vision, the vision and values. And this is the, the big difference between having the right people on the job, which is what the point that Sam is saying, and just having employees on the job. And when people, if we look at hiring just team members without looking behind their motives, the vision, values, and all of that, all what we do, and without, of course, enabling an engaged culture. So all what we do is get people who are ready to follow the job description rather than people who are ready to follow the vision and values. So this is the gap that is called discretionary effort. So the definition of discretionary effort is the gap between want to do and have to do. And this is a very important point that Pfeffer debates in his book, that no matter what kind of infrastructure you have, no matter what kind of resources you have within an organization, if you don't have the right people in the organization, you don't get a proper execution and the organization fails. And this is a very, very, very important point to start the pace of why the human capital and why human resources is important. And that's why human resources science itself is very important. One of the gaps that occurred in human resources during the previous era is that there wasn't real science in terms of graduation certificates. So when you look at for example, finance, there is a straightforward university and faculties and schools that graduate people with a finance degree. They can graduate people with an accounting degree. They have their own certificates and all of that. So you can have an undergraduate degree in finance, an undergraduate degree in accounting and all of that. However, human resources until very recently was suffering from being taken as personnel, which was part of administration. Very little people were really qualified in terms of how an HR department should be. So they used to come from various backgrounds, different backgrounds, and real education of HR came very recently when organizations like CIPD, the SHRM in the United States, or in UK, CIPD UK and SHRM in USA, and other universities started, bringing up different degrees and diplomas and professional qualifications for people who would like to work in HR. However, until today, it is still very under-educated in terms of if we compare the number of people who are within HR functions in organizations versus the number of people who are qualified and educated, the number is we still need to work on this a lot. So there is a point, Randa is making a point that sometimes you have to accept, people sometimes who are maybe lower in terms of competencies and all of that. And that's the role of HR, Randa. True HR is supposed to look beyond that and look for the domino effect and the spillover effect of having the wrong people within the team, and how that can affect not only a departmental performance, but an organizational performance. And Sam is making a point that sometimes when you have the wrong people within an organization, they will drive discussions into parallel wars, and that's not going to relate to an organization performance, which is actually true. And that's why the moderating conflict and is very important. That's why organizational culture and values are extremely important in order to understand and to manage the organizational performance moving forward. So when we look into the strategic people planning and how do we actually plan well for the human capital within an organization. So it all starts with the career planning process. So the career planning process starts with the awareness, and many people are not aware of their career options. And we discussed that a lot, specifically with the taboos that are available in some regions across the world. If we specifically relate to what happens within the Middle East, there is a taboo that when you get a high GPA within your high school, then you need to go to one of the top universities that are requiring very high GPAs, like medicine and pharmacy, dentistry, engineering, the computer science, those things. And this is not really the proper awareness, because there are so many different options, career options, and there is a very big difference between getting a job and building up a career, and that's a very important point. Then the second is all about the evaluating the vocational self-concept, which is what am I good at. And we have spoken before about the Ikigai, the Japanese Ikigai, and also we have spoken about the Jim Collins hedgehog, which is a combination of what you really love to do, what you are skilled at, what can you add to the world, and what can people pay you for, which is the Ikigai concept. So it starts with a lot of passion, that from that passion, one person can identify occupational alternatives. That's very important. And then based on that, you gather information, then you make tentative choices, and then you choose one of them and make an educational choice, and then you implement, and based on that, you start your career. Engineer Abu Shawish is saying that in many organizations, the HR is in a very different story, a very different place where the department heads are, and each one is thinking differently. And that's why it's very, very, very important to have strong HR within organizations. And strong HR, it's for the health of the organization. Actually, if an organization, if a CEO of the organization thinks of how to make this organization a best performing organization, it starts with hiring the right people. And that's the model that every organization, this is what Jeffrey Pfeffer mentions in his book, The Human Equation, that the conventional wisdom is that you invest more, you get proper infrastructure, proper tools, and proper machines. If you are manufacturing or any of that, you get proper business, which is not true. Remember, let's all remember one day, Nokia as an organization was the best telecommunication organization in the world. It was the highest market share. However, it didn't fall because of lack of machines or lack of space or lack of any of that. It fell and it lost shares to Apple and to Samsung and to other organizations, not because of lack of infrastructure, but it was because of lack of intellectual power, which was related to having the right people, within an organization. And that is a very, very, very important point. That many people actually, I agree with what Sam is mentioning on the chat, that many employees don't feel the existence of strong HR departments within their organizations, because they are still until today doing a lot of personnel. Not all, of course, but a lot of them are doing lots of personnel, and many of them as well are doing good titles of the projects, but not really strong understanding of what it is. And an example of that is employee engagement, employee happiness, and all of that. There is still, until today, a lot of misunderstanding within organizations performing those fields. And we will give an example today with employee engagement when we come to that point. So when we look into the careers, and this is the model, that Holland has developed. It's called the Holland hexagon. And when we look into the how Holland mentioned that, he said that in general, the human beings as people in terms of talents, they have 6 key areas of skills and domains. And there are certain creative domains like artistic area, investigative aptitude and appetite to have that, social appetite, enterprising and corporate appetite, conventional and logic appetite, realistic appetite. And based on that, we will all have some sort of a diagram. We will all have like a kind of a flow. Someone might be very high on enterprising, but very low on social, very high on artistic, again, investigative maybe as well, good, realistic, maybe somewhere here, conventional. So what we're saying is you might have some sort of a different platform, each one of us. And this is very important when we look into the capabilities model and what could people do, because it's a very important exercise for many people. After graduating from high school, career planning is a very important step. And this is one of the things that we lack, that across the region at least, is that when people graduate from high school or IGCSE or, depending on the system that they are studying in, whether it was, we have different systems within the Middle East. We have, of course, the local system. We have British system, American system, German and French, and those are the most famous ones. So depending on the high school system that they are studying in, it's very important that at this time, schools are equipped with career counselors, with people who are able to speak to students at that time, so that when they are graduating from their high school and trying now to register within a university, they really need to speak to a career counselor and perform those kind of career tests, and that is very important for them to grow a career rather than just get a job. It's very important, and the conflict happens a lot if HR is not involved. Many people, I see the discussions that are ongoing, Sam, Engineer Abu Shawish, as well, that sometimes, people, if they don't take care of hiring the right people, lots of organizational politics happen, culture is not efficient, and, high performance culture is not easy to enable. You get lots of internal fights and battles, which are totally unnecessary, and they waste the energy of the organization. And sometimes when people play power games, it turns into a bureaucratic organization. And we all remember those very nice clips from the movie, El Wazir Gay, and we remember those very nice steps where it was an example of organizational bureaucracy and organizational politics, which was provided by the cinema, and actually highlighted by the cinema, of how important it is to actually have the right people within an organization, so an organization is able to perform to its best rather than being a bureaucratic and political organization. So we come into the developing capital. So how do we bring in the right people? So we spoke about that. The recruitment is very important. Career guidance is very important. Ensuring that we get the people with the right point and with the right values, and that's very important to ensure that we get the right people within the organization, so that we ensure that they will do what they want to do rather than what they have to do, which is the gap between discretionary effort, which is called the discretionary effort gap that Jeffrey Pfeffer has highlighted in his book. Now we speak about, once we bring them in, how do we develop them, and how do we ensure that they are up to the expectations when it comes to performance within an organization. So the first model that we look at is the Chris Argyris ladder of inference, and this is again the very important model that it's always role modeling that starts in the beginning. So, and that's the effect, that's the importance of bringing right people in. Because if you bring in people who are not equipped with the right values and beliefs that you want from the beginning, you will have two completely different scenarios on what people observe. They will observe people who are going all the way to east and west. So how would they which one would they copy? And then here comes the struggle of what people, how people can believe what is right and what is wrong. So let's review what Chris Argyris has mentioned in his model, which was quoted by Peter Senge in his book, Fifth Discipline, that what people observe will, it will affect what they select, because they will select the data from what they observe. And then what they select, once it is repeated, it will add some cultural meanings within, depending on the backgrounds of people who are hired. And then they will make some assumptions. And then when after a while, they will make conclusions that this is right and this is wrong, and this is how they adopt their beliefs. And then it will take actions based on this belief, and then the loop continues. And this is how people learn what is right and what is wrong within an organization. And that's why when many organizations, they try to implement change programs, and we have seen that a lot. The change programs, why don't they work? Many organizations try to say, we are trying to change the culture. Why doesn't it work? Because it's very difficult to change a culture if the majority of the culture are from a certain pattern. Let's give an example. If we are trying to change lions, trying to teach them to be calm, that's going to be something that is very, very difficult, if not impossible, because in the genes of the lion that they are roaring, they are loud, and they are visible. So if we want to change their culture, it will take us years of extreme pressure in order to try to calm them down or make them not loud and roar. And this is very similar, by the way, to human beings. When we hire the wrong people all from the beginning, it's very, very difficult to change what they do. What they do has a domino effect, and this is what we call the spillover or the crossover effect, because people are going to see what's happening, and whatever they are doing, it will be visible, especially if they are in leadership positions. It will be very visible. So, people who shout, people who take conflicts personally, people who are, listening to people from the right and left. And this is what Samah is saying, the resistance to change. Yes, absolutely. And this is a very important point, that when we look at that sort of hiring people from wrong backgrounds, the observable points and the observable behaviors will affect at the end data, meanings, assumptions, conclusions, beliefs, and then actions. So it's almost impossible to change the actions without changing observables. So if we want to change actions, we have to think about changing the observable behavior. So if we have the right people, then we get the right observable behaviors from the beginning. And even if they are not exactly performing to what we want to have, but at least they will be able to develop easier than when we get people completely from the opposite point. Samah is saying that sometimes people don't know that they need to change, and that's a very important point. That's why if you all remember when we spoke about the book of motivational interviewing, we spoke about the circle of change that was done by Prokaska and De Clementi. And they spoke about the importance of moving people from pre-contemplation phase, when people are not thinking that they are doing something wrong, to the contemplation phase. And this can only be done if we are able to raise the ambivalence, the making people see the other side of the coin. So it's very important that we don't see one side of the coin, but also we see the other side of the coin, and we are able to make people see the effects of continuing within a behavior. And this will always, create a high performance culture if we are able to show people what is the right and what are the right behaviors and how do we take actions within this point. And this is what Covey mentioned. Covey mentioned in his book, The Speed of Trust, that, many people talk about trust, but how do they define trust? And here, trust is is part of it is character and competence, according to Covey. And here is the importance of, what Samah just mentioned, and Dr. Amal is saying the same, accepting the differences. It's important to see the other side of the story, and people will never see the other side of the story unless they have this sort of openness. And this is part of the intent that, is part of the character that Covey has mentioned in his model, the trust, the speed of trust. So it's very important that people have that sort of openness, transparency, and they are able to look at what could possibly be the other side of the story, what could possibly be the other understanding of the model. Then it comes to competence, skills, knowledge, experience, all of that can be developed. Skills can be easily developed and people can learn very quickly. And knowledge, people can teach. Experience is gained by time. And then based on that, people will get the reputation, credibility, and performance. So those are byproducts of capability, because, results are always byproducts of capability. And you remember we've spoken about that before, results, it's all about the byproduct of efforts that you do in learning new skills, in knowledge, taking risks and experience. You will get then credibility, performance, and reputation. So this is more easier. And then when we look at the trust model, the half and the point of the competence is easier, much easier than the character. However, because those, in 6 months on average, you can teach people lots of skills and knowledge, and then they need time to gain experience. So it's not something that is impossible to have. But which program within an organization can teach people honesty? Which program can teach people fairness? Which program can teach people authenticity? It's very difficult. It's part of integrity, which is part of the character, which is part of the belief system of human beings and values. Which program can teach people openness? Which program can teach people caring? Maybe emotional intelligence, maybe transparency. Which program can teach that? So when we look at intent and integrity, which are part of the character, it's much easier. Let's always not believe in something that is called impossible. Let's all think that everything is possible. But if we say relative possibility, the competence is much easier, much easier relative to the character in order to develop. So if we say that nothing is impossible, developing competence is 100 times much easier than developing character, because again, it's very difficult and people will always come back to their comfort zone. I like to give an example on that with, tigers and lions. And when we see in the circus, how much time, years of training, they train lions and tigers in the circus, and still, many trainers have lost their lives in the circus because the lions or the tigers have turned back on them, and they were able to, come back to their comfort zone, come back to their behavior. They are predators, they are hunters. And when the tigers come back to the normal behavior of being a predator, they will eat their trainer, even if the trainer is there. And that's why character, yes, it can be developed, but it's very important that we select the right character from the beginning. And that's why recruitment is extremely important point. And that's why Randa is saying that sometimes you cannot trust people because of that, because of any of those character points. And Ahmed as well is saying that the recruitment within an organization has to align when they bring people according to the beliefs and value system of the organization. Otherwise, it's very difficult to resist the change. And yes, absolutely true. Dr. Noura is saying that some kind of people we couldn't trust, and this causes conflict. Absolutely true, because at the end of the day, when we look at the trust model, many people are saying, I trust someone, I don't trust someone. But what is the definition of trust? And how do we trust each other? So that was a very nice model that was provided by Covey. This is the definition of trust. Part of it is character, part of it is competence. Competence can be developed, can be brought very relatively faster, much faster than the character. Character is something that builds, according to Freud. Since people are born, we will have inborn qualities, and then we'll have the ego and superego, and everybody knows about that iceberg story. So the character is built over years and years, and that's why changing the character is very difficult, at least relatively much difficult than developing the competence. So why is trust important? Because in order to create change, and this is what Jim Collins mentioned in his hedgehog concept, people have to have the radical candor. And what is radical candor? Radical candor is basically being able to speak with a challenge, so to be able to confront each other, but as well take care of others, and care about others personally. So the radical candor is very important, and if we don't trust each other, then the discussions will never happen, because people will always feel there is something, there is a background, there is a plan. Why am I having this discussion? So if the trust is not there, radical candor is very difficult to achieve, and then the high performance culture is going to be almost impossible to achieve. So how do we get a high performance culture, and how do we manage today's world of full diversity? When we look at the diversity within an organization, and that's why conflict will happen when we bring in an organization, and this is one of the challenges. Many people say, like Ahmed was saying for a few minutes back, that we need to bring in people who are alike in terms of values and beliefs. Yes, this is true. Values need to be aligned. However, the characters and the ways, the approaches of people, we need to embrace diversity. And here comes a lot of that point. There is a question from Dr. Jihan saying, what is the meaning of candor? So I'll just come back here. Candor is being honest. So and radical is being brutal about it. So if I want to mention a different word for radical candor, I will say brutal honesty. What does this mean, Dr. Jihan? Honesty, we know that. So candor is honest. So being direct. Radical is not shying away from saying it. So I'm not shying away from saying what is the honest truth. So in Arabic, الحقيقة المرة. So radical candor is being able to confront المواجهة. So to confront others without feeling that offended. So we are able to challenge. So I'm confronting people, saying I don't like what you're saying. So however, but you feel that I care about you. It's not that I'm confronting you because I hate you, or I have a plan B, or what is called in organizational politics ad hominem. And this is one of the points that we discussed before in terms of organizational politics. And it will be in one of our upcoming books as well, because Sam requested the book Swimming with the Sharks. I have a very nice book for you, Sam, which is Eat or Be Eaten, The Art of Jungle, which is corporate jungle. So we will talk about that. But in many organizations, there is sometimes what happens of character assassination. Character assassination is basically forgetting if someone is saying truth or saying something honest, but just trying to stop him from saying something, even if it is the right thing to do, because I don't like this person, so I don't want him to speak, even if he's saying the truth. And that is one of the points that we talk about. So shall we bring everybody the same in the organization? No, we should have the same values, but we should be different. And here comes the importance of diversity, because there are different balances within an organization. There is something called the mindset. So it's very important to look at difference and between the mindset. And there is a nice book that is called Mindset, actually, and we will review that book within 10 days from now. So there is mindset, and there, there are the values. It's the very important. So when we look at mindsets, we might have different ways of doing things. So I might have a different way, but I have the same values. So it's very important. Let's have an example. Let's say that we have the value of honesty and integrity. So those are values, honesty and integrity. So let's say that someone is asking me to leak a confidential document, or to tell him what we discussed behind the closed doors. We might have two ways. So we will have the same mindset that we will not say what happened, but we have two different ways. The ways is that one of the people is going to be straightforward, and they are going to say, no, I'm not going to tell you what we discussed behind the closed doors. I'm not going to release confidential information. So see, it's the value of integrity, because we promised not to say confidential information. We have the same mindset, however, we have different ways. Another person might say, I'm really sorry, I really want to tell you this, but, because I promised that I'm not going to say it. So there is a difference between, someone who is saying straight no, and someone who is going around, but at the end of the day saying no, but in an indirect way. And this is the difference between the way of thinking, the mindset, and the values that we can have as common. So we might have informational diversity. We might have social category diversity, from different categories, different social categories, social classes, different education backgrounds, and value diversity in terms of the understanding, because it relates as well to social category and information, like what people mean by socialism and individualism and collectivism. Do I care more about the team, or do I care more about my individual performance? There are lots of levels here of different values, but it's very important that those values diversity do not contradict with the organizational values. It's very important, because organizational values usually are around 5 values that are very important for the organization to move forward. Then there are personal values, and those personal values of friendship, team, caring about the society, caring about the community. We will have different understandings and different levels of that. And let's give an example of the differences that we have discussed before. In differences between human beings are endless, because there will always be differences in age, race, ethnicity, physical ability, personality typology, gender. There will always be difference in the society, in the background of societal background. So when we look into the societal background, we will have differences in religion, differences in recreational habits, personal habits, income, and background of where we come from and family. Where did we come from geographically? Marital status, parental status, appearances, work experience, educational background. All of those are diversity elements that come from the society. And we will always then have organizational differences because of our grading system, functional levels, the management status, are we affiliated with a union or not, work location, seniority, divisional departments, and work content field. So if we look at the diversity within an organization, it's endless. And in order to have people who are exactly thinking like each other is almost impossible. And that's why big part here is how we engage all the culture together. And that's why Ahmed Al-Attar, he actually got the word exactly where we wanted to mention it. Engaging those diversities within an organization is very, very, very important. And that's why the traditional old HR of personnel management cannot manage that point. It needs a lot of work, a lot of change management, a lot of programs, a lot of internal communication, a lot of engagement activities to get it right. And that's why Sengi, in his model, fifth discipline, so he looked at the importance of creating a learning organization, so people are able to, the organization itself is able to share knowledge, share context, and be able to develop and grow within the market that it's operating in. And Peter Senge mentioned that in order to achieve that, people have to have a shared vision, and that's why see, it's very important: shared vision, personal mastery, which is the ability to reflect and understand themselves, mental models, and challenging and this relates to the ladder of inference that Senge quoted when he was looking at the Chris Argyros model, and the ability to have team learning and people sharing content and context. And that's why there is two levels of learning. There is the explicit learning and implicit learning. So there is an explicit and implicit. There are things that are written down that people can understand, but also there are things that are not written and they are experience of people. It's always in the brains of people of how do we do things and how do we develop things and how do we bring up things, how do we perform something within an organization that is not written in a book, and that's the explicit team learning. All of that needs to be within the systems thinking that we have discussed during the strategy series, which is basically, just as a quick reminder, everything in life has a reinforcing loop and has a balancing loop, and it's very important for the organization to always understand what presses the brakes and what presses the speed pedal, so that we are able to speed when we want and to brake when we want, and to make the change that we want. So it's very important then for the organization and for the people to develop. And as we mentioned, this is the way that they should be able to develop. So managing the diversity is very important. So we spoke about bringing in the right people from the beginning, because human capital is very important. Once we bring in the right people, then we have the character. And then we start developing the competence. Once we start developing the competence, we will have conflicts because of diversities and because of things that we need to embrace, because people think differently, but they have the same values. So we need to align people and manage the conflict, share explicit and implicit information, and bring in the organization to a learning organization. And in order to make people learn within an organization, then there is a very important model that was mentioned in the book Peak, where is the deliberate learning. And deliberate learning is very, very important when it comes to how people learn, because deliberate learning or deliberate practice is very important to have someone who is looking from outside and giving you feedback about what you do, about the number of your movements. And we give an example about that with sports. If people are playing tennis, for example, you need somebody sitting on the away from the playground, looking at you from far away, looking at the swing, looking at the foot movements, looking at the body position, and all of that, and giving feedback. And that's why it's very important that whenever you have a goal, you share it with the teacher or the coach or the mentor, or that's why it's very important to have mentorship and coaching. And then you start practicing. And when you start practicing, this is the deliberate practice, that you will have a record. And there will be like a manifest, a record of how many tries, what was good about what you did, what do you need to develop, and this is the feedback you get. Then you assess your limits, and all of that is given by a coach or a mentor. And that's why here we mentioned, when we spoke about the Senge's model of learning and development, we said it's very important to share explicit and implicit information for the organization to grow forward. When conflict happens, then there will be different levels of conflict. And this is what I see that the majority of the latest chats have been mentioning. Dr. Amal is saying, conflict is good, and, diversity is very important. However, managing that conflict is extremely important, because conflict is good. I agree with Dr. Amal. The conflict is something that is extremely important for us to see the other side of the story. However, we have to manage it and moderate it, because if we leave it without being managed or moderated, there is a very big opportunity of a conflict turning into a corporate war. And corporate war, everybody loses. It's a lose-lose game. So there are intrapersonal conflicts. This is between self and self. So between me and myself and I, like the movie says. So it's It's I have an intrapersonal conflict, and this is where I cannot make a decision because maybe I'm my personal values are contradicting with what I'm required to do, but I have to do it. So there is some sort of an intrapersonal conflict. There is interpersonal conflict, which is the most famous. So two people together. So this is me alone. I'm just, with a question mark, what do I do? This is two people, most probably they will not be smiling, but they will try to, fight with each other. Intra-group is within one group. We will have members, conflicting with each other. And intergroup, which is we'll have two groups, and the two groups will be fighting with each other as well. So there is, there are types of conflicts of interest, conflicts over values, like the example we gave when we said integrity and transparency and all of that. We have conflicts over the means, which is the how. We agree on that we need to do something, but we don't agree on the way we are doing it. And unreal conflict, which is perception. Self-fulfilled or performative. Sometimes it's a perception that there is a conflict, but there isn't a conflict. And if you remember, we did this exercise when we were looking at the book of conflict management and managing crucial conversations. And we did the prisoner exercise. And if you remember, we said, if you separate both prisoners and you say, if you testify against the other prisoner, he will get more sentence, but you will get less. But if he testifies against you, you will get more and he will get less. But if both of you refuse to confess and both of you refuse to say, there will be other consequences. And you remember that, and I remember very well at that time, we had very different opinions, and many people said, I will confess or I will not confess, because that's the conflict of values. And we know that this happens in the organization every day. And we explain that through the value conflict diagram, which is sometimes, between the daughter and between the mother or the father, that sometimes they say, I value freedom, I value success. So if I follow you, then for me, this is slavery. And the parent thinks, if I follow your freedom, then this is wasted opportunity. I want you to study, I want you to get better. However, each one of us sees the value differently, and each one of us sees the freedom different. And that's why it's very important to look at the mental readiness of people for change, which is part of the human capital readiness for change. And that's why we reviewed that US Marine model. And I remember both Ahmed and Atiyah, they quoted that several times, and they said, how ready is your brain? This is a very nice model to say that sometimes people have healthy brains, they are ready, to absorb, to make change, they are ready for absorbing what could happen. Sometimes people have ill brains, and, the mental health is not ready because they are not sleeping well, they are, in an angry mood. And we all know that when people are in angry mood, they cannot make good decisions. When people are withdrawn from the society, they are falling into depression or have any of the other symptoms, like, for example, physical illness or, withdrawal from the society and all of that. So it's very important. This is a very dynamic model because you cannot classify people for life. So you cannot say, for example, someone is healthy, so that's it. But we all of the human beings on earth, we all pass from one to the other. And, we come back and we pass from one. And sometimes we go back and forth and back and forth. So it's very important that when we look at the mental health, we all have those changes in our lives. And it's very important that the HR here, the role of HR is to be an active culture sensor and an active individual sensor. That's why it's very important to have counseling, coaching, mentorship. It's very important to have that sort of sense or probe, mental health probe within an organization. So, because if the majority of people at the end of the day, remember when we mentioned the triangle of execution, the strategy and execution, We said the biggest gap happens within the execution. And also you remember the FEFR, the discretionary effort, you know, the gap between what I have to do and what I want to do. So if I want people to perform to this level and I want people to execute properly, they all need to be healthy. So part of that is HR needs to always try to move people from ill, you know, towards healthy. And this requires a lot of effort, lots of programs, engagement and happiness. And this is what we have been discussing. And this is what Ahmed mentioned a few minutes back. So it's very important when we look into the values and behaviors, you know, the rules and policies and procedures. So we need, and this is part of the HR points, is, you know, managing those conflicts when they occur, because sometimes people will behave in a certain way, because depending here, you know, remember the if people are not ready to make change, if people are really suffering or in the survival mood, sometimes they will not be performing to the values and they will be performing behaviors against the values. Here, what we need to have rules, policies, and procedures, and this is where the HR point comes from in terms of rules. What happens if people break those values within an organization? In order to moderate conflict, and in order to be able not to only apply rules, but to be able as well that, you know, when we are applying rules, many people think that, you know, policies and procedures, if people drive on the shoulder, this is the penalty. However, it doesn't work like that within an organization, because we need to look into why people have done it. And that's why the investigation committee and people who are, you know, looking into why people have broken rules and values need to always put the people's interest first. And this is what the model of managing crucial conversations focus on, that, you know, a distressed system will always give the biggest effect on what? On power. You broke the rules, this is the penalty. However, an effective system needs to look at the interests of people, where, you know, what happened, and, you know, get into what is right and what is wrong, and then exert power at the end. And this is the importance of understanding others, importance of the emotional factor of understanding, counseling, coaching, and people into, as if exactly HR is acting as an organizational psychologist. And this is basically what HR, modern HR, needs to do, because HR needs to always be an occupational or organizational psychologist, aiming to improve and change the behavior of people towards performing better, so that we can fill the discretionary effort gap, and we can fill the execution gap that exists in an organization. And both of them depend on people who are able to perform efficiently, and efficient performance can never happen with an ill mental health. It happens when people are mentally healthy, and that's a very important factor. And that's why you know, Martin Luther King, you know, says that, you know, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. How do we make people speak? And this is a very important thing. So it's a combination of trust, and that's why we have spoken about Covey's trust model. So it's very important we bring in the right people, because it's about character and competence. Competence we can develop, but character, we need to bring in the right people. We need to enforce the values, and we need to make a learning organization. So we need to have sort of this attitude that we support each other, talk to each other. So it's about the high performance culture within an organization. This is what we need to bring in. And this can never happen without having proper learning systems, proper investigation, proper rules, proper understanding of the mental health importance. And that's very dynamic, a very, very, very dynamic equation. And that's the importance of engagement, which is the last part of our workshop today and review. So when we look at the importance of people, people are everything. And we have spoken about that as a very important factor in any organization. People are more than 55% of the success. Processes, you know, come next, and then substance or material come last. And we have seen this in many, many, many organizations. And we have given an example of Nokia as a very obvious organization that the, you know, the people, it did not fail because of lack of resources, but lack of intellectual power, like we mentioned. So when it comes to the engagement, there are 4 parameters of engagement, and this is what we discussed before. The rational engagement or rational happiness, which is a very important thing about transactional. If I'm going to work for the organization, so I'm going to give you time, what are you going to give me in return? So there always needs to be a semantic relationship, yes or no, 1-1-2 relationship, 0-1 relationship. So I will give you time, I will give you expertise, my expertise and my time and my skills. What are you going to give me in return? The emotional engagement or emotional happiness, which is basically how I absorb my time within the organization. And we have spoken in that point about the hedonic life, ups and downs. Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're unhappy. How do I absorb my time within the organization? And this is the emotional side of the engagement. Then we spoke about the hand, which is the physical engagement. And this is basically, remember the job demand resources model that was created by Demerotti and his colleagues, which is the balance between what you demand from me at work and what you provide me with resources at work. And then the hope, which is sustainable happiness, which is what is the goal and why shall I work with you, and how does working within the organization add value to my personal mission in life. And we spoke about the importance of designing engagement according to the context of the organization itself. And we have given a very nice example that sometimes a quarter is not equal to 2 5s or 2 10s and a 5. It's so sometimes people think that 25 is equal to 10 10 and 5, which is not the case, because sometimes, so if I take this from you, I can give you those in return. This is not true, and this is part of the importance of managing crucial conversations, that sometimes this coin in itself alone means a lot of value by itself. So it is not about giving me the price or the breakdown of the coin. Sometimes the coin is very important, and that's why it is very important to understand the employees, every employee, what kind of importance do they place on each of the parameters of the engagement that we have discussed, the 4H, the head, heart, hand, and hope. There is also very important to keep rewards ongoing, because it's one of the most important addiction factors. And we relate to that with the technology. All the games that form addiction to people always makes people win rewards and run after rewards. So it's very important that if we want people to change, if we want people to keep on the behavior that we want, we have to reward proper performance, and we have to keep this reward ongoing. We also have to look into the emotional bank account, and this is something that is very crucial in organizations. Every time we make, and this is what Stephen Covey mentioned, by the way, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he said that, when we talk to people, we always make deposits and withdrawals. And, we make deposits when we are trying to show kindness, and this is part of the character. And that's why, once again, the importance of hiring the right people. And we make withdrawals also because sometimes with the characters, when we completely, start bad-mouthing, disrespecting others, arrogance, and all of that is something that is extremely destructive to the organization. Randa is saying that in life, the emotional bank account make the whole difference. Absolutely. This is what makes people love each other, carry very nice memories from each other. And, whenever they remember each other with good things, and also feel good about coming back to the organization. The danger here, Randa, and, is always the perception. And we did this exercise when we were reviewing the book of Also Managing Crucial Conversations, when we said, what do you see in front of you? And we had many people saying, this is the Japan flag, this is a red circle, this is a ball, this is a sun, a red sun. So we said, all of you are true. And that's why it's very important, the perception gap. How do I know what is this exactly? I have to do something very simple, which is sometimes ask employees, what is this and how do you see it and how is it important, so that I understand and I'm able to engineer the engagement equation in the right way. This is the job demand resources model that is done by Demiroti. And basically, if the demands are higher than the resources, what will happen is reduced health and energy, which will cause stress and exit from the system. If there is a balance, then there wouldn't be reduced, and then organizational outcomes are going to be achieved. Motivation will be there, and people are going to have balance. And that's why for HR, and this is big part of what HR is doing, is to do job analysis and to be able to understand how to structure a proper HR department, how to ensure that people have the right resources that are equivalent to the demands that we are asking people to perform. And then based on that, the people can then have, instead of reduced, they will have proper health and energy. Organizational outcomes will be there, motivation, and then organization is going to perform better. So in order to do this, we need to ask and we need to analyze, and that's why the importance of listening, which is a very important point. And you remember when we spoke about this model, we said that what we like about this model is, the very old way of one is that one person is speaking, one other person is listening. And this is what always is the challenge in organizations. And we spoke about the 5 levels of listening. Many people listen to respond rather than listen to understand. And this is the final model of crucial conversations. How do we manage conflict and manage conversations within an organization and understand what people need, and design how what makes people get engaged within an organization. So basically, we have to look for the shared meanings, we have to understand, and that's why it's very important that, if we don't understand, we will never be able to create a high performance culture, which is exactly like when you go to a physician, they always have to diagnose first. Nobody will give you a prescription before they diagnose. And that's why we spoke in when we were discussing the employee engagement, we said, please do not buy off-the-shelf surveys. Please do not try to prescribe before you diagnose. It's very important that you understand, you diagnose what are the drivers first, and then based on that, people are able to perform the engagement strategy and design that, and design what kind of activities they need to do. So it's all about understanding, pool of shared meanings when conflict occurs between people, creating this safety distance, safe to speak. And this is very important, that we create this kind of trust. And we come back into the 2 C's, the character and the competence. That's very important, character and creating safety, being able to be silent and listen to people. So it's very important that is occurring during the conversation. This can never happen unless that before the conversation, I do my homework, I relax, I'm able to understand and read and ask myself, what is my story and where do I come from, and why am I suggesting those possible activities or actions or scenarios. And then we perform that. And then after, we again look into how do we move into action, but with the trust and with the collaboration. And this is what we call, the importance of radical candor here. We end up with facing what we need to face and getting into the plan and being able to move forward within the HR plans in the organization. So this has been the discussion for the 8 books that we have reviewed out of the first 50 books from the HR, from the Book in One activity. We will now stop recording, and then we will open the discussion to the floor.